number jumping up there. So welcome newcomers. Okay, so we are recording the webinar, so the recording will go out afterwards. Thank you, Sophie, for the helpful reminder. I forget that more often than I'd like to admit. Okay, so terms and definitions. Fixed price. This is when you are place of work where you plan to bill a specific amount that is agreed upon with the client regardless of the time you spend. Often I see fixed price plus expenses, or fixed price might even include expenses depending on what those expenses are. So things like Facebook or Google AdWords or hosting and things like that are often included in a fixed price, and then things like printing or photography are often in addition to the fixed price. But as far as function points concerned, the term that we're going to be looking at today and the field that we're going to see it, fixed price is when there's an agreed upon amount and the time you spend doesn't impact what you plan to bill. Time and materials, work that you bill based on the time that you spend multiplied by your hourly rates. Typically, of course, in addition to the materials, so the expenses that you're purchasing as well. So time materials being when you actually are billing for your time. Becoming more and more rare these days with agencies that I'm speaking with, but still, of course, very common. Retainer, an agreement with a client to bill a specific amount monthly or quarterly, regardless of the time you spend, unless variances exceed specified limits. So, a retainer, based on how we term it, how we see retainers, is when you are billing a client a certain amount, and that amount is not being impacted. It doesn't change based on the time you spend. This term is thrown around a lot and often incorrectly. So I often hear people saying, well, we have a retainer with a client. It's a $5,000 retainer. But if we spend $2,000 of the time, we bill them $2,000. If we spend $8,000 of the time, we bill them $8,000. Well, it's not really a retainer. It's time and materials with some sort of agreed upon target. So that's really important to keep in mind, is that the amount you bill is not being impacted by the time you spend, unless, of course, you're going way over or under. And I'll talk about that in a second. A few tips that I want to point out there, things that I'm seeing a lot that I want to address, things that I think that you should consider. Firstly, do not let your clients determine the layout, style, and detail included in your invoices. I see this all the time, and sometimes it's not avoidable, especially if you're working for some sort of government entity or a not-for-profit situation, or just a really large client that's a stickler for invoices. But if every single client that you have is requesting different styles and different levels of detail and different information on your invoices, it's going to make your life a lot more difficult. It makes it harder to work with systems like Function Point. And then it can grow to be a bigger problem with more clients that you gain. So I really recommend having that not be an item that is negotiable. Don't let the level of detail on the invoice be a negotiating chip that your account executives have to gain new business. Keep detailed reports on your retainers and evaluate the relationship on a quarterly or bi-quarterly basis. So you're going to want to make sure that you have an agreement with the client that every 3 months or every 6 months you're going to look and see how over or under you are going on your retainers and reevaluate that relationship. As much as you don't want to be overworking on a retainer, you also don't want to be underworking either. Because if your client determines one day that, hey, this retainer just isn't worth it, as opposed to lowering the amount, they might just cancel the relationship altogether. So that's an important one to be doing. Evaluate your billing rates regularly and determine if they're relevant. I speak with a lot of agencies that do a lot of fixed price billing, where the fixed price is dependent upon competition, dependent upon market factors, things like that, and not so much the hourly rates. But they have a complex hourly rate structure that they track against that doesn't impact or affect the way that they bill. And that rate structure might even differ based on client or industry, but never actually impacts the values that they put on invoices. So it's just something that you want to look at regularly and determine if it's even relevant. Is this impacting how you bill? And if not, determine if it's impacting any decisions in the future. You might want to look and see that, yes, we had a senior person who's worth more. Their worth is usually calculated in cost rates. You may want to have it in billing rates, but just don't let it get out of hand. Don't allow yourself to create a massive, really complex rate structure if it doesn't actually drive any decision-making or any invoice creation. And then a little bit on account executives or perhaps project managers. Allow your AEs or the person who opens up the job to create the initial invoice, and define a process for your AEs to either create the invoices that are following up that initial invoice, themselves, which we would prefer, or an easy way for them to notify the person who does so. I speak with a lot of agencies all the time who are having an issue with how can our team let the accountant know when to create the invoice, so that the accountant can then sync it with QuickBooks or put it over the accounting program or do things like that. You know, in a perfect world, the AEs, the ones with the knowledge of what should be billed, would be the ones actually doing the billing. If you can get into that process, that's going to free up your bookkeeper to be working more in the accounting side and less of the actual client management side. So I really do recommend trying to have the AEs or the project managers being the ones who are actually creating the invoices themselves. So yeah, so just a few tips I wanted to point out there, common things that I'm seeing a lot. You know, I work with a lot of different agencies every day, and these are some consistent issues I'm seeing with invoicing. Okay, so let's jump into the actual system today. So a few things I want to point out really quickly around some standards. So up at the top right in your system, if you hover over the question mark, you're going to find access to the training site. So I recommend going into the training site. You can go into the FP University, which is a great area for self-driven training programs. They're all free. There's a lot of really good content there. I highly recommend checking them out. Send your team there. You know, send your account execs there. Send your creative team there, and get them to run through that program. Some really great stuff there. I also recommend taking a look at the FP library. This is where you're going to find documentation and videos and cheat sheets and all that good stuff. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. So we're currently looking at the dashboard, dashboard of my demonstration system. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to open up a job, and it's going to be a fixed price job. And I'm going to talk about what makes it a fixed price job, and then how that is going to impact the invoicing later on. You know, the way that you are creating the job initially is really important in making sure that they are set up correctly later on. So as many of you know, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and choose to add an estimate. The first step for any job is to create an estimate, and we're going to do that for our client Safeway. We're going to call this fixed price webinar job, just to make it easy for me to identify it later. Fixed price webinar job. Select our type. Let's just say this is a brochure. We're going to keep it really simple. Choose our contact at our client. Put in our description. Choose our rate category if it didn't fill in for us. Enter our delivery date, we'll say sometime next month. Then we're going to choose our category. And I cannot stress this enough. Unfortunately, it is not possible to make this a required field, but I do highly recommend that filling in this field is something you do for every job that you intend to bill. If you never intend to bill a job, if it's internal or part of some other campaign structure, but that job itself will never be billed, you can either leave it blank or even create a new option here that is NA or something like that. But if you intend to bill it, please make sure you fill in that category. Can't stress it enough. Very important. You might actually be using work type for that field, but typically you'd be using category. I'm going to leave work type blank. It's this field that I want to focus on today. The job structure I'm going to choose is going to be really simple for time purposes. We're going to be doing some design, some copywriting, and we're also going to be purchasing some printing. Of course, your service structure might differ from what we're seeing here today. So let's make this really easy. It's going to be $5,000 plus about $500 worth of printing. So I'm going to put in 25 hours of design, 25 hours of copy, and I'm going to be purchasing $1,000 worth of printing. And we're going to mark it up by 20%. It's coming out to $6,200. A lot of times people are asking me, how can I set up a job that's just a fixed price or just project-based? It's not hourly. It's just an amount that we intend to bill. The value that equals the estimate is the fixed price. Whether or not you choose to enter hours here to come up with that price is up to you, but the final value on the estimate equals the value that you intend to bill. So that is how you're entering then a fixed price. That category field is going to help with that as well. Highly recommend filling it out. Save that, approve it if you should choose to do so, and then go ahead and choose to add job. The job is then open, and it has an estimated value of $6,200. Now, before we actually invoice that job, I want to touch on setting up a time and materials job. And really, it's pretty redundant. It's essentially the exact same thing. I'm actually just going to copy that estimate I just created, and we're going to call it, T and M webinar job. When I click submit, it's going to show me the same structure. Now, oftentimes I speak with agencies and they're telling me, okay, well, for time and materials job, we're not putting in an estimated value because it doesn't matter. We intend to bill based on actuals. It doesn't really matter. I highly, highly recommend putting in an estimated value. One of the first things I do when I'm looking at an agency system is I do a job find for active, and I look at the estimated value column. And I really love seeing values in every single one of those. It's something that you want to do just as a best practice. Even if you're not really sure, just make a guess or pull up old jobs and look at how much you spent on those. You really, really want an estimated value in all of your jobs, preferably, but at least the ones where you can. But you really want to try to make sure that you can on every single job that you open in the system. So if I'm seeing some questions coming in, but it looks like you're typing away, anything that you think we should address on screen?
You know what? We've got some really good questions coming in. One of them is actually in relation to QuickBooks. So I guess I just wanted to touch on that you are going to be having a QuickBooks-specific webinar in 2 weeks' time. So probably that one, we'll have to answer that one outside of this webinar or in the following one.
And we can follow up on that. I don't think the QuickBooks webinar is in a couple of weeks, so I think it's actually quite a ways out. I'll pull up the schedule later on. Maybe I'll pull it up towards the end and we'll go through the webinar schedule. Okay, so so we have our time materials job. It's also for, in this case, it's estimated for $6,200, but we're going to bill based on the time that we spend, and we'll go ahead and we'll choose to add that job. We're going to bill all three of these and then go through some multi-job invoicing as well. The next thing I want to touch on is retainers, and this is really the concept of this recurring billing structure. Now, you might also have other things that are, say, for example, billing for something like web hosting, or anything where you're billing a set amount every month, and that amount doesn't change, or you're just billing a consistent amount on a regular basis. I've heard of quarterly retainers, although that's pretty rare. So I'm going to create a really simple one, and then I'm going to show a more kind of robust example, a more complex retainer structure as well. As opposed to creating it, I'll show a pre-created one. So we're going to go ahead and choose to add another estimate. We'll put this one let's keep it for Safeway as well, and this is going to be called Retainer Webinar Job. Select our type. So this is going to be, we'll make it something really simple. We'll say social media, and we're going to, choose our contact there, rates, due dates. Typically be the end of the contract. So in this case, we'll say it's the end of the year, so it's the 31st of December, and we're going to select our category, and that's going to be retainer. And actually, that's something that I should mention, because I was copying that webinar job. I didn't actually change the category, so I'm going to change that time materials. You had it on fixed price there because I copied the fixed price job for that other one, so make sure to update that. Okay, so we're selecting webinar. Again, can't stress this enough. You're going to see why in just a minute. So this retainer structure, we're going to choose, in this case, let's say digital, and we're going to choose social media management as our single service. Now the webinar structure, the retainer structure, I should say. The retainer structure is highly advised to have an estimated value that equals the value you intend to bill each month. That's going to allow you to create those invoices really, really easily in a few clicks. If it does not, then doing so is going to be a manual process. Unfortunately, there are 12 months in a year as opposed to 10 months in a year. If there were 10 months in a year, then it'd be really easy. You could just do 10% of the value on a monthly basis. But unfortunately, the fact that there's 12 months in a year makes the percentage impossible. So therefore, you want to have your estimated value equal the amount you intend to bill each month. Maybe in this case, it's going to be $1,000 per month for social media management. We're expecting to spend about 10 hours per month. The estimated value equals the monthly billing amount. So very, very important. We'll go ahead and select to add job. Now that is a really, really simple retainer structure. You know, social media management, we're just going to track to that one service line. It's $1,000 a month, easy stuff. I work with a lot of agencies that have significantly more complex retainer scenarios, including scenarios where you might have any and all kinds of deliverables requested, you know, through the lifespan of the retainer. In that case, what you're wanting to do is set up a project, and within the project, you will have a job that is the same as what we just created. That job within the project has an estimated value that equals the amount you intend to bill each month. In this case, this retainer is 100 hours at $10,000 per month. Every job then goes into that retainer is a representation of the work that you're doing. Those are the jobs you typically would track time against, create schedules for, assign tasks regarding, and so on and so forth. But they are not jobs you're actually billing because they are all included in this case, $10,000 per month that you're billing, the same job for over and over and over again. And then there's some, great abilities to, report on your estimated hours and actual hours on a monthly basis. Doing something like saying, well, how did this retainer perform in the month of February? Let's actually see, maybe it was, well, let's say March actually. Looks like we haven't, we just opened this one, so might all the work is in March. So we actually have 24 hours worth of work. So probably did the rest of the work in January, but it allows you to see, what are your budgeted amounts versus your actual amount on a monthly basis. But again, it's really crucial that the estimated amount equals the amount that you tend to bill on a monthly basis. So now that we've kind of looked at some of the simple stuff around, setting up those jobs in a way that allows for consistent billing, we're actually going to go ahead and we're going to start to invoice them. I'm going to talk about some routines and processes that you're going to want to make sure that you're following and suggesting to members of your team, whether they be your account executives, your project managers, or your client service people, or your accountants. Those individuals that are determining what to bill and when to bill it. So before we actually start to create those invoices, Sophie, I just want to check in. Any questions you think we should show on screen?
There is one concern. Lisa has just mentioned that you kind of sound like you're in a tunnel. I'm just curious if anyone else is having audio issues right now hearing Mark.
I was actually hearing a little bit of feedback myself as we started, and I wasn't sure if it was maybe just coming through mine. I don't think that there would really be a way for me to troubleshoot that at this time. So I do apologize if people are kind of hearing some audio issues. Hopefully it's not too bad, and we'll be able to kind of chug along. I noticed a few people chimed in there. What's the general consensus?
It looks like everyone's having a pretty good time. So I'm sorry, Lisa, that maybe it might help if you log out and log back in. Everything else seems to be going okay. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm glad it's working well for some. For those that it's not, I apologize. Hopefully, maybe logging out and logging back in will fix it, or even just maybe kind of try a different output on the audio there. But let's see. Yeah, I don't think there's much I can do. So let's chug through here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to navigate back to that fixed price webinar job. Now, often in a fixed price situation, you're going to bill up a certain portion of it up front. That's usually what I see. Let's say in this situation, it's like a 50% up front. Again, if you can have the person who opened the job be the one to accomplish this, that's great. If not, what I highly recommend is that you have the system send an alert to the person who needs to do that. So now you can go into the alert management and set up an alert for that individual to receive an email anytime a new job is opened. And that's going to allow them to know when they need to go in and create a new invoice. Whether it's the person who opens the job or the person being notified of a new job, what they're going to do is from the jobs details page, up at the top, select Add New and Invoice. And in this case, in my scenario, for my fixed price webinar job, I'm billing 50% of my $6,200. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter 50% in my billing percentage. That's going to calculate 50% of my estimated amount. and it's going to auto-create an invoice for 52% of my estimate. Notice my estimate is $6,200, and the invoice value is $3,100. So it just fills in for me automatically. Now from this page, I can make some different changes. You know, I could say put this back to 100% and click on estimated, and it fills in 100% of my estimated. Now I could drop it down to 25% and click on estimated, and it fills in 25%. I could also, of course, you know, put in any value I wish manually. But in this case, let's say 50% of estimated, which is how it was when we landed here. But in this case, I'm not going to bill the expense. So I'm just going to blank out the expense. Perhaps it's, you know, 50% of our internal services, and we'll bill the remaining percent of our services plus 100% of the expense upon completion. So we'll save that. Our invoice is created. We can, of course, produce our client-facing version. Here's just a really simple PDF in my system here. Nothing too fancy. So our invoice is created, and now if we go back to our jobs details page, then we're going to see that we have a invoice. The invoice tab is popped out. The invoice value is $2,500. We don't have any cost in here yet because we haven't done any work. The estimated is $6,200, and we can see in our financials tab, you know, how that's broken down. So $1,250 and $1,250 for design and copy. So that's, you know, pretty simple on the fixed price side of things. On the time and materials side of things, and one thing I should mention, we're not really done on the topic of the fixed price because we've only invoiced 50% of this. We need to invoice the second 50%. And I'm not going to do that right now. We're going to come back to this in a minute, and we're going to look at some methods, some processes that I can recommend to make sure that that's done smoothly and you're not really missing anything. So we're not quite finished on that yet. We're going to come back to it in just a minute. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to find a job to do a time materials invoice for. Now, we opened up a time materials job today, but we actually didn't put any time against it. And instead of putting time and expenses against that job, I'm just going to find one that already has it. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to do a job find, and I'm going to select my category of time materials. Now, I can then do a custom status selection, or I can just select find active. That's going to produce a list of all of the active jobs with a category of time materials. Now notice that I have then, well, a few things to point out. One is I have 16 jobs here. You will only be able to do this type of thing if your active jobs list is accurate. If you do a job find in function point and you select find active and the list that you get isn't really a good representation of the work that's in the agency, if there's old stuff that hasn't been closed down, then that's step number one. The first thing you should try to accomplish this week is get all of your old jobs closed and start to think about a process to make sure that those are closed regularly, because that find active is really, really important. You don't want old stuff bogging down your list here. It's going to hinder your ability to do these types of things. Secondly, notice that I have the job category field being displayed. You're not going to see that by default. I'm seeing that because I've selected manage columns and I've chosen job category. That's why we're seeing that there. So I can then look at these jobs and see, okay, well, you know, the client it's for and the name and the type, the category because I've selected it, when it's due. We then have our estimated actual variance and invoice amounts. The value we're seeing here, plus minus, is directly relevant to this time and materials concept. This is showing us the difference between how much we've invoiced and the value of the work that we've done so far. So for example, well, just this top one here, you know, we've done $22,430 worth of work. We've invoiced for just under $5,050. So we have $17,385 worth of unbilled time and materials. You know, I'm not going to build that job. I'm going to choose something that's a little bit simpler. Choose this Pro Shop signage job here, I think. So if I select that, and you'll notice here we have $1,100 outstanding. So if I select that, it's going to bring me into my jobs details page. And I actually just want to take a look at the financials tab and see what are our unbilled time and expenses. Here's one timesheet here that's not billed. Production's all billed. we have some non-billed timesheets and copywriting. In printing, we don't have any actuals in here, so we haven't done any printing yet. We have $1,100 worth of unbilled time and expenses. Looks like it's all coming from copywriting and design. So we want to then do an invoice for that value. Now we want to do an invoice for, let's say, the full $1,100. That is the difference between what we've invoiced and the value of the work that we've done. So up at the top, I'm going to select to add new invoice. There's something really, really important that I want to point out on this page. In this case, we're going to choose to calculate from, I'm going to select remainder from actuals. And I'm going to explain here the difference between actuals and remainder from actuals. This is a very important difference. If you select actuals, it's going to calculate the value of all of your unbilled time and expenses. So all of your unbilled timesheets and all your unbilled expenses will add up to the value that equals to your invoice. If you select remainder from actuals, it's going to give you the value that is a difference between what you've invoiced and the value of the work that you've done. Now that may sound the same, it might just sound like I said the exact same thing twice, just in different words, but it's actually two different things. And the reason being is that if I have a timesheet for, let's say, $100, and I invoice $50 for it, that is a billed timesheet. I just chose to bill it for less than its value, but it's a billed timesheet. So if I choose actuals, it's not going to be included in there because it's a billed timesheet. It's not unbilled. It's not going to be selected when I choose actuals. But that remaining $50 that we didn't bill will fill in if I choose remainder from actuals, because that's the dollar difference between what we've invoiced and the value of the work that we've done. So if you are an agency that likes to play around with how much you bill on specific time and expenses, then this is an important item for you that you should really kind of think about, because if you're customizing invoice values and customizing amounts on timesheets to come up with with amounts that maybe are agreed upon in a discussion, that's going to impact how you invoice them later. So that's the difference. This is the value of all unbilled time and expenses. This is the dollar value between what you've done and what you've invoiced. So that's really important to keep in mind. And in this case, in this job, based on what we actually saw, like what we looked at, the values would have been exactly the same because we didn't have any billed timesheets that we billed a separate amount for. We just have some design work, one timesheet, 3 hours at $150, totaling $450, and we have some copywriting, 3 timesheets totaling $650, all at $100 an hour. Notice how it all just filled in for me, and I can then choose if I want to actually customize that a little bit. So I can select, well, I want to invoice this timesheet and I want to invoice these 2, but I don't want to invoice this one for whatever reason. Or I can select it. So you can select and deselect the specific timesheets or specific expenses that you want to bill for. Save that, and that is our invoice created. And before I jump back with the questions there, something I want to do actually is I'm going to delete this invoice. And I'm going to jump backwards for just a second. Typically, in almost all cases, as long as you are not getting kind of funky with your invoice values, as long as you're not customizing the amount you're billing on a timesheet by timesheet basis, all you really need to do for time materials invoicing is just choose to add the invoice based on actuals. And even if you selected remainder, in almost all cases, those amounts are going to be exactly the same. It's still going to end you up with an invoice for the value of your unbilled time and expenses, which in most cases is going to be the same as the difference between your invoice and actuals. So, but I did want to point that out because there are some agencies out there that will get creative and will invoice certain timesheets for more or less than what they're actually worth, depending on a variety of different circumstances. So the system will accommodate those types of scenarios. You just need to know what those values mean. So that's why I wanted to point it out. So if any questions on any of that or anything you think we should address?
You know what? I have to admit there's some interesting questions coming in right now. Things that we might need to take offline. There is one that maybe you can quickly touch on. I'm not sure. You can definitely shut me down if you want.
Go for it.
I have Christian asking about the best way to combine billing types. For example, a client makes changes beyond the original estimate and they want to bill hourly for the changes. So they want to bill both the original cost of the estimate plus the actuals.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, let's touch on that quickly here and point out some of the different options that you have and some of the different ways that I would see that. So you know, the easiest, I'm going to save this, and the way that we're going to look at that is let's do a job find here, and I'm going to do a job find for category of fixed price and find active. I'm just going to pull up a list of all my fixed price jobs. I'm then going to select a job, and let's choose one that I know has a generally kind of a simple structure here. I think this should be pretty good. I want to make this, actually, there's quite a bit to that one. Let's find one that I think would be a good example. Let's just use this dealership signage. I think it has a couple of categories, but that's fine. So there's 3 categories for this one, but we'll just use it. So when we look at this job, we're going to use it as an example. You can see that we've estimated $15,000, and you can see that our actual is $5,800, and we invoiced, you know, just about $1,100, you know, when we first started this off. So maybe that was just like an initial bill that we did for the client, but it's a fixed price job. We intend to bill them $15,000, you know, at the end. Now, you know, the answer to the question that was just asked, you know, what if, you know, you're looking at a combination? So it's a fixed price, $15,000, but maybe this job wasn't the best example of what we're going to use it anyways. But, you know, we're also wanting to bill for any kind of overages. You know, my first suggestion would be bill it, and maybe we can actually find a job. Let's actually find a job that's a bit of a different, a better example. I have one in mind. So we're going to pull it open here. Okay, so we're going to use this job called GA Annual Report, and let's say that this job was a fixed price, and I do believe that it's not. It's a time materials, but let's just say that it was fixed price, and the fixed price was $12,436. We've invoiced $8,643, but we've actually gone. I was thinking that we actually had gone over, but we haven't. So, you know, I don't really actually have a job in the system that's already set up to show what you're describing in that question, but I'll just talk it through. So, the simplest and easiest way is the first invoice that you do, you just do it as you wish. So maybe it's 50%, and then from there, I guess it depends on where it's determined. So if you then do a final invoice and it's the remaining 50%, and then you kind of wipe your hands of it. You put the job to close and the client says, yeah, great, everything's fine. And then they call you up 2 weeks later and say, actually, we need some additional work done on this. All I would recommend doing is opening the job back up, track your time against it, and bill based on the time spent. So, you know, the way that you categorize a job does not limit you from billing it in different ways at different times. You know, you would just do more invoices on it later on that would be, you know, based on actuals as opposed to estimated. So, you know, that's easy. However, that's a really simple scenario. You know, the job is done, you do the final invoice for the final 50%, then they come back and ask you for more, you put time against it, you bill for the time. But let's say that's actually not it's not as clean as that. You know, you do the first invoice, you're 3/4 of the way through, and then you determine, hey, you know what, in order to get this done, because the client has adjusted the scope or there's additional revisions or things like that, you know, we need to do additional work on this. We need to do more work. There's a few things that you could do. One is you could actually go into the estimate and modify it. And you have a discussion with the client and say, based on your requests, we know it's going to take an extra, you know, $2,000 to finish this. So I'm actually going to go into the estimate, and I'm going to add a new service group, and I'm going to say, well, this requires some design work, and this is going to be out of scope design revisions. And this out of scope design revisions is going to cost an extra 20 hours, coming out to $2,000. So we're tacking on an extra $2,000 onto this job, and we just invoice that $2,000 at the end. That's a really easy way to do it. Another way to do it would just be to track to the existing structure and then bill time and materials moving forward. So you bill 50% up front, and then the client says, "Hey, we need all this work done," and you say, "Okay, you know what? Based on your requests, I can't bill you, the remaining 50%. It's not going to cover it. So from here on out, I'm just going to bill you hourly." And then you just switch halfway through. And when you switch halfway through, then of course you're going to want to adjust the job category to reflect that, so that when you're running reports on what job categories you still have open, it is reflected in those lists. So I guess one of the main points I'm making with all of this is that there's a lot of flexibility. It's a good question. I wanted to address it because it comes up all the time. How you bill things kind of determines where it's going to sit afterwards. So if you bill something based on estimated values and you want to continue doing so, then maybe a scope of work revision to the structure is applicable. If you don't want to do that and you want to just track time and bill for the time, then change the category structure to time materials and just start to bill for timesheets moving forward. As long as you're kind of on top of it, as long as you're monitoring it, and the person who's doing the billing is actually aware of what's going on, then you really shouldn't have many problems. You'll be able to keep track of it pretty easily. So I hope that answered that question. And I can see that we have a few more. I'm going to come back to the questions in a minute, but because of the time constraints we have, I want to jump into retainer billing. And then I want to make sure that we get into multi-job billing, because the multi-job billing, as a part of that, we're going to be talking about some processes and some routines that I'd recommend for your team to be following to make sure that your invoicing is getting done correctly and accurately, at the end or start of each month, or whenever you may choose to be billing. So I'm going to do a job find here, and I'm going to pull up all my jobs that have a category of retainer. And we're going to select Find Active. And I have a handful of retainers in the system here. So let's actually choose this. Well, let's use actually the one that we've been working on so far. So this retainer webinar job, it's $1,000, and we just opened it up, and it's $1,000 per month. This really, really simple example, all we do is we just come in to the job and choose to invoice it for 100% of estimated, which is the default, unless of course you've adjusted the defaults in your system. But you want calculated from estimate, billing percentage blank. Blank equates to 100%. Add invoice, and we now have an invoice for $1,000. Really, really simple. Because the estimated value equals the amount you're billing each month, you just generate the invoice, and it's done right away. Notice I don't have my account selected there, so we'll fill that in. So that's really simple, but typically, especially if you have a lot of retainers or more than a handful, you want to do your retainer billing in a batch, just because it's easier, it's less time consuming, and if you set them up correctly, then you'll be able to. So it's easier than doing them one by one. If you only have a couple, I was actually speaking with an agency yesterday that almost exclusively is fixed price, a bit of time materials, but they also have they had two retainers. They hadn't really set them up on the system yet because they just had two of them. And in that case, really just build them one by one. You don't need to do it in a batch. There's only two of them. Just go in, add an invoice. It's 100% of estimate. Easy stuff. Generate the PDF, send it to the client, move on. Really, really simple. But I do speak with a lot of agencies that have a lot of retainers, or more than a handful. Maybe they have 7 or 8 or 20 or 50, whatever it might be. And doing them in a batch is a lot easier. I'm actually going to delete this invoice here that we created on our own, and we're going to do it in a batch. So the way that we're going to do it in a batch is I'm going to do a job find again for retainer and active, I'm going to get 4 examples. Now, one of those examples is my Safeway monthly retainer that is a part of my project. This is the one I pointed out that's worth $10,000 per month. And we can actually see, if we were to go into it and look at the project, that the project has all of these jobs with all these values. But this job, this is the only one with a category of retainer and an estimated value. And that is why it shows up in our list of active retainer jobs, with a job category of retainer representing how we intend to bill it, and an estimated amount representing the amount that we intend to bill for. From here, the batch is really, really simple. All I need to do is select Add Invoice, give it a name, so we'll call this, March Retainers. Leave everything else the same. Billing percentage is the same. Everything else is the same. All the retainers are in there. Add batch. This next page will allow you to update some descriptions. Typically, you don't need to do this in this batch. Select Next. And it's going to show you a list of all of these jobs. And this is the value that you'll be invoicing, the estimated value. So when you select Add All, it auto-generates an invoice for all of these jobs for the estimated amount. So it becomes really, really simple to do your monthly retainer billing. You select Finish, and all of your invoices are then created. When you look at the batch, you see all the invoices you just generated, and you can notify your clients for all of these. So with just one button, you can send an invoice email with the PDF and or a link to the portal to every single client on the list. They all get the invoice. The whole invoicing process for all your retainers is done in a few clicks, as long as the job category is there, the active list is accurate, and the estimated value equals the amount that you intend to bill on a month-by-month basis. The next thing we're going to look at is the concept of multi-job billing for, so we're going to look at time materials and talk about that a little bit. And then we're going to look at fixed price and talk about some routines and some processes for your AEs. So if you just heard a noise, anything that you think we should address on screen? I can see you're kind of typing away there. Anything you think we should touch on?
You know what, there's lots of questions, and I have to admit I haven't been able to read all of them yet, so I'm not sure which would be the best to share with you.
No problem. I'll let you get back to it. We'll probably, we have 10 minutes left in the scheduled time today. We might go over by, 5 or 10 minutes, so anyone that would like to stay on, please feel free to do so, and we'll stay on to answer your questions. I know that Sophie's been working hard to answer them as best as she can, so don't worry, we'll make sure to get them all answered either today or via follow-up email, at the very least. Sophie, no pressure. Take your time. Don't let them intimidate you too much. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a job find. We're going to be looking at our time and materials. Now, most agencies I speak with don't have the luxury of the following situation, but let's say that we're going to be looking at a situation where we bill all of these jobs are going to pull up at the end of the month for the value of the time that we've spent. If your agency operates in that way, well, then you are the envy of everyone else on the webinar, because that's very rare these days. That used to be how the agency world operated. When I first started at Function Point, many, many years ago, most agencies I spoke with just billed for the time they spent at the end of the month. Nowadays, it's very rare. It's usually more of a fixed price scenario, or if they're billing time materials, it's some sort of agreed upon date where those invoices go out. But we're going to take a look at a batch process anyways, and you can use this in your own scenarios. So we're going to do a job find for category of time materials, and we're going to select Find Active, and that's going to pull up a list of all my time materials jobs. Now from here, when I look on the right side, that amount in brackets is a negative amount. A negative amount is letting me know that the value of the invoice amount, how much we've billed, is less than the value of the work that we've done. So, that's letting us know that we have $17,385 of unbilled, value, unbilled time and expenses. And then you'll notice one where it is 0, letting us know we've invoiced the value of the work that we've done. and then one where it's actually over. And this is going to be pretty rare. You're not going to see this too often. But in this case, we've actually invoiced more than the value of the work that we've done. Perhaps it was some sort of situation where we did like a pre-bill on an expense that came in for less than we were expecting, or an expense came in for less than we were expecting, but we just billed the agreed upon amount. It came in less because of the relationship we have with the vendor, but we're still going to bill the client as if it was a regular expense. So those things may happen from time to time, but most of the time in these time material situations, you're going to see a negative value. So from here, we're going to choose to add invoice, and we're going to call this time and materials March billings. We're going to select calculate from actuals. Now again, that's calculating all of my unbilled timesheets and expenses. Select add batch invoice. Update descriptions if you want to. And then we have our larger list. Now, in this situation, you have, it's a little bit trickier. This is something that and this is pretty rare. I don't come across this very often. But for agencies that have a lot of time materials jobs where they bill them every single month, and again, pretty rare, but if that's the case, then this can be it's a little bit more tedious or a little bit more hands-on than the retainer situation. What I would recommend that you do is, first of all, look at the list that we were just looking at. So the list that you're just looking at, as you go down here, if you see a lot of cases where you have negative amounts, and there's going to be a lot of invoices generated by adding all to the list. Any case where you see a 0 or a positive number, those are going to end up to be zeros, zero value invoices, which you don't want in your system. So the options are to go through and add them one by one for the cases where it's applicable, or add all, which is what I'm going to do. Once I've added all, I'm then going to go through the list and delete anything that has an invoice value of 0. So the top one right away, you're going to notice this amount here is equivalent to the amount that we were just looking at in the jobs list. Our actual amount compared to our previously invoiced amount equals the amount we intend to invoice right now. But as we scroll down, here's a 0 value invoice. That's the one where the previous invoiced amount equals the actual amount. So I'm going to get rid of that. Here's a 0 value invoice. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going through and getting rid of those 0 value invoices where we don't need them. So all those zeros are gone. I'll select finish adding to batch. And we've generated invoices for every job that had an amount of unbilled time and expenses. So here are all our invoices. And we can then choose to notify selected, and it's going to notify everybody. This top one's unselected because the invoice contact doesn't have an email address, so we'll need to generate that one as a PDF and send it manually, or update the email address for that company. But we can notify selected. The system sends out the invoices to all of our clients that we've generated that invoice for. So this is an example of if you put in the category, and if your active list is accurate, then you can pull up all your time and materials jobs and bill them all at one time and have them all sent out to the client, pretty easily, with only a little bit of manual manipulation done to make sure you don't end up with any 0 value invoices. Because I see that from time to time, pretty rare, but every once in a while, and that's not really something that you want in your system. Not really a huge impact, to be honest with you, but just, general system cleanliness doesn't really, you don't really want 0 value invoices in there. The next thing that I want to show, we're going to take a look at time materials process, and then we're going to jump back to questions. But the time materials process is actually something that I find is very applicable to a lot of agencies I speak with, and touches on this concept of giving more control to your account execs, or your project managers, or your client service people, those that are responsible for deciding how much should be invoiced. So if we were to do a job find and say, show me everything that is fixed price and find active. I think I might have said time materials a second ago when I meant to say fixed price, is what we're looking at next. So fixed price and find active, we have 21 active jobs in the system that are fixed price. And I can go through and see their estimated value and see their invoice value. Now, something that is quite common is that the amount that you intend to bill may not be, exactly uniform across all these jobs. They start at different times, they end at different times. You have different agreements with different clients. Maybe one is billed 100% upon completion, another one is billed 50-50, another one's billed in thirds. These are the scenarios that you have to contend with. It's not going to be all as simple as just add invoice for remainder of estimated. And these things are usually decided upon based on the person who's liaisoning with the client, whether it was an initial agreement when the job was first opened or based on a discussion. A lot of people I speak with these days are telling me it's based on a discussion. You're working with the client, and the client has seen the most recent versions of the design or the most recent version of the website or whatever it might be, and you talk to the client and you say, okay, based on this milestone being hit, we're going to send you an invoice for another 25% or something along those lines. So how can you get to a place where you can be, having a routine for this, making sure that nothing is missed, making sure that your accounting department knows what to bill and when to bill, or making sure that your account executives are able to bill for the amount that makes the most sense. A way that I recommend doing this is every person who is opening up a job or a person who's responsible for the job, especially the billing factor, should be a contact on the job. Now, when you create a job, you're automatically a contact on the job. That's why, typically the person who's creating it should be the one doing the billing. When you create it, you're automatically a contact. If you are, if you're not creating it, but you're the person doing the billing, you want to be a contact on that job. So, you can do that by, adding a person as a contact on a job. So once the job is opened, going into contacts, selecting manage job contacts, and then adding in the staff person. You can also accomplish this instead of the contact. Perhaps you just want to use the AE field. So if the AE field works for you, that's totally fine as well. The point I'm trying to make is you want to be able to do something like this. I want to be able to come in here and say, show me everything where I am a contact. I'm responsible for these jobs, or I'm the AE, or a way of identifying my list of jobs. And then select Find Active, and we'll put this to category of fixed price and Find Active. So what I've accomplished here is I've pulled up a list of all the jobs that are open where I'm responsible and they are fixed price. From here, what I'm going to do is select the button that says Editable List View. When I select Editable List View, this is actually going to allow me to come in here and put in comments on each of these jobs. And I might then put in something stating what to bill. Bill the remaining 50%, for example. Or something like, not ready to bill yet. And as I'm coming in here, I'm putting these comments on, what should be billed, what can be billed, notifying a person who's going to be doing the billing. Another thing that can help with this is actually updating the statuses as well. Now, if you're going to be updating the statuses to accommodate billing processes, it's just really, really important that you're consistent with it and that you keep on top of it. A common thing to do is to change this to a status of completed. The system actually considers completed an active status. It's still going to show up in active lists. Invoiced and or closed after it's is not an active status. That's when everything is done, including the final billing. So I might put these to completed, all the jobs that are ready to be invoiced and how much they can be invoiced. Or maybe I have a status called ready to bill. And if you set up the alerts to do so, that can notify somebody that billing needs to be done on these. And we're putting in a comment on how much to invoice. And what that allows someone else to do is pull up a list of all the jobs that are fixed price that are ready to bill or completed, and then take a look at the comment. So, I'm just going to enter some values. Bill 25%, bill remainder of estimate. So I'm putting in these values, I'm putting in these comments, I'm maybe updating statuses. And if I'm the AE and I'm able to do the billing, all of this might not be necessary because I would just go ahead and bill them myself. But doing this type of thing can allow another person, so another party, to do a job find and say, well, I want to see all the jobs that are fixed price, that are completed, select find, and these are all of the jobs that are fixed price and completed and ready to invoice. Now, I don't see that comment field here. So I don't see that field that's telling me how much to bill. So I'm going to choose to manage columns, and I'm going to add that field in. It's called date description. I'm going to add that date description field in. I'm going to put it beside status. Maybe, get rid of some other stuff I don't need. Maybe I don't need office. We'll leave the rest, save that. And then I can see status and then the description showing me how much to invoice. Now, oftentimes the amount that you're invoicing on these fixed price jobs is going to differ from each other. One you're billing 50%, one you're billing a different amount. Doing a batch invoice on these is in that case is difficult. So you would typically do them one by one, but I'll show the batch as well. I know that we're now 2 minutes over time. So I'm going to do a check-in with Sophie, and then I'll let everyone know how much time we have left going on here. Sophie, anything that you think we should address on screen?
No, again, really good questions, but I think I'll be able to handle these ones. Thanks.
No problem. So I'm seeing the attendee list drop off a little bit. I'm sure people have places to go. We are going to send a recording out. I only have about maybe 5 minutes or so left before we'll start to wrap it up. So, billing the remainder of a fixed price job, really simple. In this case, this one's telling me, bill 25% of our fixed price webinar job. I would just select it and then choose to add new invoice and invoice it for 25% of estimated, add invoice. That's my invoice created, and then I can go on about my day. Now, part of that process is then, of course, going to be jumping back to that job and then either updating the status to, if it's now done, closed, or maybe opening it back up again. If that status, as opposed to saying completed, said ready to bill or something like that. But you can actually do them in a batch as well. So, I now have 4 jobs that meet that search criteria. I might generate a PDF of this, pop that out, keep it on the side, just so that it's telling me, how much to bill. And I can then go ahead and from my fixed price jobs list, add a batch invoice. 100% of estimated we'll start off with, because each one of these so here's our batch. We're going to add each one of these in, but then for each one, we're going to go through and edit them one at a time. So you're still kind of creating the invoice one at a time. We're just, doing it from one screen. So this one needs to be, 50% of estimated based on my report. So my report says, bill the remaining 50%. So that's 50% of estimated, and save and close. Let me know I'm missing the count. Save and close. We then edit the second one. And this is telling me 100% of remainder of estimated, enter that amount, save and close. And we're just kind of, going through, and instead of navigating through a bunch of different pages in the system, we're doing all of these invoices on one page while the reports is telling me exactly what to bill. So you can create some processes around your AEs or your project managers, doing a job find, either using the AE or using the job contact, pulling up a list of those jobs, and then updating things like the statuses so that they're representing, what needs to be billed, putting in a comment on what should be billed, and then communicating that to the person that needs to be doing the invoicing, or better yet, doing the invoicing themselves so they don't have to do these comments and these status updates. They just go ahead and create an invoice for each one for the amount that they need to bill for the remainder or whatever it may be. So more power to the AEs, more power to the project managers, the client service people, whoever it is that's liaisoning with the client and deciding what to bill. If they can be the ones actually doing the billing, it's going to make everyone's lives easier and going to allow you to make sure that nothing's being missed and everything is being updated regularly. So that's all we had for for the webinar today as far as content. I know there's a lot of stuff to cover. I was actually running through some different scenarios prior to this about how we could get through everything within the hour. It looks like we went a little bit over, but not much. I apologize if I was moving a bit fast, but there's a lot of content to cover to make sure we get through all the topics that people have been talking about and requesting. So wanted to make sure we got through all those different scenarios. Sophie, anything that you think we should address? Any questions we should address on screen?
There is one interesting question that if you don't mind taking a look at, that'd be great. It's from Michaela, and she wants to be able to invoice for like specific months and capture a cost within a time range. So when you're creating an invoice, and Michaela, please excuse me if I'm not following your question correctly. So to bill for January and then to bill for February, but not bill for March.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So the way that you would do that. And it would probably take me some trial and error to find a job that actually meets the criteria in order to be able to show a good example of that. But let's give it a try. So this is okay. That's fine. Just looking to see if I have a job that would be a good example. Let's we have a different one. What the biggest value I can get here? Nope. Okay, let's give this one a try here. This North American travel brochure. Let's look at the time that's been put in and see what kind of date spans it runs across. So February and March. February, March. Okay, so if you are billing based on specific months, you can only choose an end date. You can't choose a start date. So for example, this job here, we have in total, it looks like $5,575 worth of unbilled time and expenses. If I choose to add a new invoice to this job, I can say, and notice how it's showing me, I have 30 uninvoiced timesheets. I say, well, I only want to invoice up until the end of February. Notice now that I only have 11 uninvoiced timesheets. And I only want to invoice up until the end of January. Well, by the end of January, there are no uninvoiced timesheets. So we're going to do it for the end of February. And then there's 11. And then we're going to do it up until today. And then there's 30. So what you can't really do automatically, it would require you to generate a report and then manually create the invoice based on that report, or go through and manually select the timesheets. What you can't do automatically is say, I want to, I have unbilled timesheets for January, February, and March. I only want to invoice for February. You can say, I want to invoice for January, and then I want to invoice for February, and then I want to invoice for March. And that's typically what that situation kind of relates to. Like that's usually how it falls. Like it's now the middle of March, or it's close to the middle of March. I want to invoice for the month of February, so I'm going to change the invoice date to the end of February. Add invoice for actuals, and it's going to generate an invoice for all the timesheets in February. So notice I'm not seeing any March timesheets there, so I'm just invoicing for February. When I then go to add an invoice for the same job, notice that I now have 19 uninvoiced timesheets instead of 30, because I just invoiced all the February timesheets. So it's that invoice date that controls the value of the actuals. So I'm not going to invoice my actuals for for those 9 days in March, and then now notice that I'm seeing my March timesheets, and I have $3,430 worth of invoicing here. And if you need to be more creative, then of course you would need to manually select or deselect the timesheets if you're wanting to bill, part of a month, or you're wanting to bill, back 2 months but not the 2 months prior. Then you're starting to get a bit more creative and you have to be a bit more manual about it. Anything else, Sophie, that you think that we should address before we wrap it up here?
Actually, no, we've got a lot of great product suggestions coming in now, so it looks like all the questions are starting to peter out.
Okay, well, I'm going to launch a poll just seeing how valuable you found the webinar today. Feel free to answer that as you would like. Don't worry, we won't hurt our feelings. I always wanted to know how valuable people are finding the webinars that we're putting on. This one in particular is a bit of a doozy. It, of course, covers a lot of content. We're usually moving a bit faster than usual, so sometimes I worry a little bit about it. It may be being a bit tough to follow with the amount of content it's covering. So maybe in the future we'll break up this invoicing webinar into a couple. But while people are kind of teetering off, I want to talk a little bit about the webinar schedule and just what we have coming up here. So let me pull that up. If I can find my go-to webinar. Okay, so let's take a look at the schedule here, and I'm just going to show you the webinar page itself. So we have, right now, we have project and task management scheduled for the 23rd, and then CRM and sales scheduled for the 6th. That's actually going to be flipped. So we're going to have CRM and sales happening on the 23rd, and then project and task management happening on the 6th. So these are going to be flipped. Emails are going to be sent out about that, so you're going to receive a notification. The 20th of April, we have FP Accountant Setup and Basics, and then on the 4th of May, we have an interactive session on FP Accountant. So that one's a little bit of a more limited availability, and then we're going to be covering specifically one on retainer setup on the 18th of March. So you can see the registrants are starting to kind of get pretty full into those. So I'd recommend getting in them as quick as you can, especially the interactive FP Accountant session. I'm actually thinking of capping that one pretty much right away. So if you register for that sometime the next day or so, you might squeeze in. But then, even the ones we have starting in a couple of weeks, we're already up to 70 registrants. So, it's getting close to the limit. So get into the webinars as soon as possible, and we'll reserve your spot. So as per usual, we're going to be following up with a recording of the webinar, as well as links to relevant documentation and data that we think would be helpful. And if you have any feedback for the webinar, please feel free to email us and let us know. You can reach us at success@functionpoint.com. Again, that's success@functionpoint.com. Feel free to give us any kind of feedback or requests or suggestions you have for the webinars. Yeah, so appreciate your time. Two Wednesdays from now, so the 23rd of March, same bat time, same bat channel. We're going to have a different presenter. I'll still be on the webinar, but I'm going to be co-hosting with my wonderful colleague Daniel Pantich. Is going to be presenting that webinar on CRM, sales management, and sales reporting. He has a lot of experience in that area, so he's going to be driving that one, and I'm going to be co-moderating. I don't know if that sounds right, but Sophie's going to be on that one as well. She'll be helping me out. And yeah, so we're going to do that as a team. And then after that, we're going to be doing the project and task management. I highly, highly recommend for those still on and listening right now, check out the project and task management. Exciting stuff happening for that one. April 6th, really, really cool stuff. So I'm really excited about that one. I appreciate all of your time. Have yourselves a great rest of your Wednesday, a great rest of your week. Spring is coming soon, so enjoy it. Days are getting longer. Time's about to change, all that good stuff. So yeah, thanks again for joining everyone, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye now.